Let's talk about why Florida has become such an obvious choice for so many people. Because for a lot of people, especially people coming from the Midwest, the Northeast, and other colder parts of the country, Florida starts looking less like a vacation spot and more like a different way to live. For months at a time, people in those cold areas are dealing with weather problems, snow on the roads, ice on the windshield, gray skies, heavy coats, bundling up just to go outside, and sometimes not really wanting to go outside at all. And after a while, that doesn't just affect your schedule, it can affect how you feel. Now compare that to Central Florida. Here we get somewhere around 230 days of sunshine every year. That's not a small difference, by the way. That's a whole different mood. And when you think about what that does to your everyday life, it starts to make sense why Florida becomes so appealing. Because suddenly, instead of being stuck inside, you can actually get outside. But once people start looking at Florida, the next question becomes, well, where are we going in Florida? Because Florida is a pretty big state. Why Central Florida? And one of the first things we need to talk about is location. Because when people think about relocation, location really does matter a lot. The Villages is located right here in Central Florida, and that gives us a really interesting advantage, actually quite a few. We're not sitting in the middle of a major city, but we're also not in the middle of nowhere, and that's a pretty sweet combination. We're about an hour and a half from the Orlando area, about the same from Tampa. So if you want a beach day, you've got options. East Coast, West Coast, Atlantic side, Gulf side, pick your mood. Unfortunately, some people are surprised when they realize that the Villages is not actually on the coast. And I get that. When people picture Florida, they often picture the beach right outside their front door. But the Villages is inland, so the beach is not 5 minutes away, unfortunately. But here's another way to look at it. If the Villages were sitting directly on the coast, the homes would probably be financially out of reach for a lot more people. Because, homes along the coast are usually way more expensive. You would also be dealing with more coastal traffic, salt air, tourist congestion, and all the challenges that come with living near the beach. So for many people, Central Florida ends up being a pretty good balance. You still have access to both coasts when you want a beach day, but day to day, you're not living directly in the middle of the coastal pressure. And because we're close to Orlando, Tampa, and Sanford, we also have access to several major airports. That means when you want to travel, or when family or friends want to come visit you, you have choices, and so do they. And choices matter. Now, one of the things you hear people say about the Villages is that we live inside the bubble. And yes, that is a real nickname people use here. The Villages kind of has its own world of convenience. Restaurants, shopping, entertainment, medical offices, recreation, golf, music, activities, and a whole lot more. But here's the nice part. You get all of that without having to live in the middle of a big city. And that is a big deal, because a lot of people want access to big city things without dealing with big city headaches every single day. And that's one reason the Villages and the surrounding areas work so well for so many people. You can enjoy the convenience of daily life here and still be close enough to Orlando, Tampa, the beaches, and other destinations when you want a change of scenery. Now, whenever you talk about Florida, there's one topic that almost always comes up. Yes, hurricanes. And I get that. I understand. People see the news, they see scary pictures from coastal areas, flooding, evacuations, wind damage, and it can make Florida look pretty intimidating. But here's where location really matters. The Villages, remember, is in Central Florida. We're inland. We're not sitting directly on the coast, and that makes a meaningful difference. Now, does that mean we don't pay attention to hurricane forecasts? Of course not. This is still Florida. You listen to severe weather warnings. You prepare if necessary, because storms are to be taken seriously. But being inland helps reduce one of the biggest coastal risks, which is storm surge. And depending on where you live in Florida, coastal hurricane exposure can also affect insurance costs. And that is another reason inland areas can feel more manageable for many people. And when you look at areas around the Villages, places like Leesburg and Ocala, they are often mentioned as being safer inland areas when it comes to hurricane exposure. Not hurricane proof, no ho, but generally less exposed than coastal communities. So I don't tell people, oh, don't worry about hurricanes. Of course, that would be silly. But I do tell them there's a big difference between living in the beach areas and living inland in Central Florida. And for a lot of people, that difference gives them a little more comfort when they're thinking about making Florida their next chapter. And there's one other hidden location advantage that a lot of people don't think about right away. That's Port Canaveral. Because from the villages, you can drive about 2 hours, hop on a cruise ship, and suddenly you're on vacation. That's not a bad way to start a trip. No airport, no luggage carousel, no connecting flights. Just get in the car and drive over, get on the ship. And for people who love cruising, that is a real bonus. And oh my heavens, I forgot to talk about this one. We're close to Orlando, right? You know what that means. Disney and Universal and SeaWorld and all the other Orlando attractions that people travel from all over the world to visit. So if you like these kind of attractions, or your kids or grandkids, your wife, daughter, husband, or visiting family like these kind of attractions, being this close is pretty handy. In our family, let's just say some people enjoy Disney a little more than others. But it's still nice to have it nearby. Wait, hold the phone. We've talked so much about geography that I forgot to mention 2 big Florida financial advantages. And they can really have a financial impact on you. First, Florida has no state income tax. I'm talking 0. Now compare that to several other states. I'm not going to bother reading all of these percentages. You can look at them for yourself. Now your exact tax situation, of course, depends on your income and your filing status and your overall financial picture. So always check, with your tax professional to really understand all those differences. But believe me, if you live in Florida, that 0 state income tax can really keep more money in your pocket. Let's take a quick look at residential property taxes. The Villages encompasses part of Marion County, Sumter County, and part of Lake County. As of 2026, you can see the percentages for Marion, Sumter, and Lake counties. And then you can see how it compares to a bunch of other things, including the national median, which is 0.89%. And compare that to some of the higher tax states. Well, you can just read all the averages for yourself. I don't have to go through them. Remember though, every property is different and your actual property taxes depend on the home you buy, its assessed value, and other factors, of course. But generally speaking, the Villages area property tax rates compare very favorably with many parts of the country. And there's one more advantage. If Florida is your full-time residence, you may qualify for Florida's Homestead Exemption. That doesn't reduce the value of your home. It reduces the taxable assessed value used to calculate part of your property taxes. And that can lower your tax bill. And there's even more good news. In November of 26, Florida voters will decide on a proposed constitutional amendment that would further increase the homestead exemption for many full-time Florida homeowners. And if it passes, even more of your home's assessed value could become exempt from certain property taxes. So between no state income tax and competitive residential property tax rates and the homestead exemption, Florida offers some meaningful financial advantages that are definitely worth considering.